We're glad to have you with everyone here on the Steve Malzberg Show on Newsmax TV. I'm Rob Astorino. All right, so we have a topic that is so near and dear to my heart and should be to everybody in America, because you are under attack from the bureaucrats at Housing and Urban Development. Congressman Paul Gosar from, well, just around the Phoenix area in Arizona, the 4th District, is a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and thank God he's doing his oversight. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Rob.
So why don't you explain to the nation basically what Westchester County, where I am the county executive, has been dealing with since 2010, and what the plans for the bureaucrats at HUD to do to the rest of the nation are.
What they were trying to do, Rob, was a backdoor attempt at trying to racially profile and income profile, microengineering of our local communities and surcept planning and zoning aspects for a kind of a utopian-like type of viewpoint from their standpoint. So micromanaging and dictating where and when we can build and live in our local communities. And this amendment actually was a limiting amendment, not allowing the housing, transportation and housing development to microengineer this at local levels.
This should be the most nonpartisan or bipartisan issue from anyone in Washington, because it affects everyone's state or district, where you have bureaucrats who literally, as you were saying, want to take away local zoning control, local land use decisions from communities and give it to bureaucrats in D.C. who want to say who lives where and how in each community. And they do it through AFFH, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing is what they call it. And you want to defund this program, correct?
Well, what I want to do is I don't want any of the funds that would be utilized for the community block grants, which are an essential aspect to a lot of communities across this country, to utilize these amendments to actually dictate and implement their utopian-type views. And so what this does is still allows the community block grants to go forward, but not in the way that they shape and form and intercepting local control.
Now, in Westchester County, I have signed a paper that says we no longer want your community development block grants going forward, because if we don't take the money, then we don't have the strings attached. That is not stopping HUD, though, to go after us for the years in the past where the county did accept the funds. And by the way, we just disperse it to the local communities who, ironically, the poorest communities who use this to build affordable housing and other things in their community, they're being penalized because HUD is trying to make different communities conform to their liking. And this is seen as outrageous by even many Democrats in my county, which is 1 million people. We border on New York City. What is it like in your district right now in the Phoenix area, and what have you been hearing from around the country on this?
Well, it's you know, the overreach of the federal government. People are sick and tired of the government telling us what we can do, when we can do, and how much money we can make. And in fact, you heard the president say yesterday in his town hall yesterday that we shouldn't live to have expectations of making living up to our dreams and making some money. We should be happy with what we get from the federal government. That's not the America that I grew up in, and that's not the America I want people to have opportunity with. And that's the vision of this administration, to surcept that aspect and limit our choices and opportunity. And that's what made America great, Rob.
And so did the suburbs in many areas, where people moved out of the city on their own choice, had enough money to buy a piece of property, maybe a quarter acre or wherever, and live in a home. And that was called the American dream. Right now, this is the assault on the suburb by HUD, because they would rather see a city-like everywhere and put people in apartment buildings and de-emphasize single-family residential zoning. And that's what their assault is on Westchester, and I'm assuming that's what their assault is throughout the United States with this new rule.
Absolutely, and we utilized your county as an example in front of the House floor, in that the experiment went vastly wrong in your county, where you actually had to return well over $12 million because you could not actually utilize them without surcepting local planning and zoning and control. So it's a sad day that you know, an intended block grant that is allowed for local control and to people that actually need it, intercepting the control and bypassing local jurisdictions on how they want to plan, how they would like to live, and then how they would like their communities to respond and interact.
And what this is, Congressman, is something called disparate impact, which twice nearly went to the Supreme Court, but the federal government was basically able to buy off those who were going to the Supreme Court on this issue. So it hasn't reached there yet, but this is throughout all of the agencies, and what disparate impact basically does is use statistics to prove guilt where there is no guilt, and takes away the constitutional rights of localities or businesses, et cetera. This is disparate impact in its ugliest form, correct?
It absolutely is, and most people will understand it as quotas.
Right. That's right.
Is that, from educational standards, it's been illegal to racially profile in this country since the 60s, and we have seen the U.S. Supreme Court soundly reject the implications of quota systems. So when we see this over and over again, and especially when you see yesterday intercepting the constitutional ability of the administration and the executive privileges, particularly in the NLRB, this should be a standpoint that we as a community stand up across this country and say, no more. We can't have this. We won't allow this to happen, and we're prepared to take you to court. And I think that's where we'll resolve this.
Here's where it gets very muddled, okay? Here in New York, the Reverend Al Sharpton came to Westchester County to attack me on this issue of HUD and not accepting the money and not yielding to the demands of the federal government. And they wrap it around words like discrimination, segregation, and worse, which of course puts you on the defense as opposed to telling people exactly what is at play here and how fast rights are going to be taken away from people, especially from local communities. And I think this is something that I'm so glad that you were sounding the horn on this, because it is a dangerous precedent. If this is allowed to go forward, all of a sudden communities 5-10 years from now are going to basically say, what happened? Because in their view, in HUD's view, even quarter-acre single-family residential zones are potentially discriminatory. And we in Westchester have to prove to HUD that it's not, and we've done that, by the way, 8 times. We've also used Pace University, and they've concluded separately that there is no exclusionary zoning in Westchester based on race or ethnicity, et cetera. So they keep making up new stuff because they want a different conclusion. But people are going to have to find out real quick what this really means. This is not a Republican or Democrat thing. So where are you now in this process, working with the Senate and Senator Lee?
Well, what we're trying to do is the House has gone through the appropriation process, and as everybody knows, we won't pass a budget again this year because of Harry Reid in the Senate. Mike Lee has been trying to propose this on the Senate side so that it becomes a rider that when we go to an omnibus aspect, we actually have a champion both on the Senate and the House side so that it's included in the language of the omnibus. Until we go back to regular order, Rob, this is the game that we have to play, and we have to be on our due diligence on making sure that the feds comply to the will of the people and to the Constitution. The one thing I will also tell you, Rob, is that next time Al Sharpton shows up in your neighborhood, ask him to cite where in the Constitution that allows him to do what he's trying to do towards you with the federal government. It's a limited power federal government, and obviously, these people don't understand the Constitution. It's their way or the highway, but they're confronted by the lack of knowledge in regards to the Constitution.
Well, I've been stunned because I've had officials from the federal government basically say to me, we don't care what the Constitution says. This is what we're trying to do and what we'll end up doing, which is frightening to me. And there is such thing as local law and New York State Constitution, just like Arizona has their own Constitution, which grants, in our case, home rule on local land use.
Well, that's why what we have to do, Rob, is we've turned into lawlessness in Washington, D.C. You saw the Supreme Court flip the NLRB yesterday.
That's right.
But it all starts with the Attorney General, who's entrusted by upholding the rule of law, limited government in local and state affairs, but enacting the rule of the law. And it's time that a bureaucrat like Eric Holder suffer the consequences. It's time for him to go, to give better legal opinions both to the president and to the agencies. Well,
the problem is we're fighting the Justice Department on this because they're with HUD, and we're making our case. We'll win it in court, and we'll also win it in the court of public opinion. Keep up the good work, Congressman. We appreciate it, and I'm willing to go down to Washington and testify anytime.
Thank you, Rob. We certainly appreciate it, and keep the faith and make sure that people know that this is an assault of the big federal government over our individual lives.
Thank you, Congressman. Look, up
You're
next
welcome.
on the Milesburg panel, right here on the Steve Milesburg Show. Stay tuned, folks.